The previous portion we ended that Lamech had a son by the name of Noach. And the Torah tells us in the end of Bereshis, Lamech lived 182 years. Vayoled Bain. Now, what is the meaning Bain? Bain means a son. However, Rashi over there cites the Medrash, because it doesn't say by the other people that they gave birth to a son. Why by Noach does it say he gave birth to a son? So Rashi cites the Mitshtan Chuma, Shemimenu Nivno Olam. The word Ben comes from the word Binyan, because from him, the world emanated. Because after the great flood, the only one who survived was Noach and his family. So Noach is the equivalent of the father of mankind. So Mimenu Nivno Olam, the world was built through Noach. So Vayoled then, Lamech had given birth to a Ben, to the person that he was going to be the progenitor of what? Of existence. That's Ben. And then the Torah says, and Noach gave birth, fathered 3 sons. Noach was 500 years old. Vayoled Noach Hashem Escham v'Yefes. He had fathered 3 sons, Shem, Cham, and Yefes. And over there, Rashi points out, although the Yefes was the eldest of the 3, Shem is mentioned first because Shem is the tzaddik. And because he's the tzaddik, although age-wise, he's not the oldest, he's mentioned first because he has the greatest value of all the sons of Noach. So the Torah already had told us that Noach fathered 3 sons. And yet, now the Parsha again repeats itself. Eilu Todos Noach. This is the progeny, or the chronicles of Noach. Noach ish tzaddik, Tob hoyim dorosov. Noach was a person who was tzaddik, perfect in his generations. Ez Elokim hislach Noach. Noach walked with God, or God accompanied Noach. The old Noach shlosha vonim, and Noach fathered 3 sons. Hashem is chavis yofis. We know the Torah doesn't repeat itself, especially if just recently the Torah had shared with us that Noach fathered 3 sons. Shem, Cham, and Yefes, wants to repeat itself. So over here, there's a beautiful sifarno. The Torah tells us, Esel kim esalech Noach. What does the mean esalech Noach? So if you look in the sifarno, Holach bedrochov, lehetiv luzuloso v'chich b'nei doro. He walked in the way of God to do good with others, to inform the members of generations of godliness. Meaning, what did Noach do? Esel kimislach Noach means Noach was involved in outreach. The generations that he lived were wayward. They did not recognize God. Their behavior was at a level which was unacceptable. And he went and he shared with them, and he would try to influence and convince them to follow the proper path. So, Vayoled Noach. And then after that, the Torah tells us, Vayoled Noach. Now, how old was Noach when he fathered children? He was 500 years old. And Rashi at last week's parsha had asked, and all the other generations, they fathered children, they were only 100 years old, a little more than 100. Why did Noach first father children when he was 500 years old? So Rashi cited the Medrash. The Medrash answers that the Torah tells us, in whose merit did Noach's children survive? In his merit. Because the only reason why Noach survived was, the Torah tells us, Noach motzachem b'nei Hashem. He found favor in the eyes of God. Because he found special favor, that's why he survived. Because we have mentioned many times, when the attribute of justice is in effect, you cannot be perfect enough. And if you cannot be perfect enough, the question is, why did Noach survive? And that's the Gemara in Sanhedrin asked this question. So on that, the Gemara answers, because Noach matzachem b'nei Hashem, because Noach found special charm, special favor in God's eyes. The Gemara itself does not explain what the basis for that favor was, but nevertheless, Torah says, so his children were not at that level, that they found special favor in the eyes of Hashem. So why did they survive? Because they were his children. Now, why did he merit to have children? So here the Sforno says, Yoled Noach, that when he started to influence and to rebuke, admonish the members' generations to take the proper path, only in that merit did he merit to have children. That's why the Torah now was juxtaposing his fathering the children to as Esel Elokim Salach Noach. Esel Elokim Salach Noach means he was involved in Kiruv. And in the merit of being involved in Kiruv, that's why he merited to have children, the 3 sons that he had. This is the reason why it's not repetitious, because in previous portion just tells us Noah had fathered 3 sons. And that's Ben, and through them he will build the world. However, here it's giving us the reason why he merited to have the children, because he was involved in what? In Kiruv. Because it was Esel Kim Salach Noach, therefore, Vayolad Noach, Shloshe Bonim, Hashem Eschom V'Syofis. So Rashi, in last week's reading, cites the Medrash. As I mentioned, all other people in those generations would have father children after they were 100 years old, because up to the age of 100, people were considered minors. Only after 100 were you considered an adult, and you had a level of culpability, liability for your behavior. So Rashi over there, the Medrash says that if his children would have been tzaddikim, it would have created a little bit of a problem, because then each one of his sons, when the world would be destroyed, they would exist in their own right, and they would have to build a teva, an ark for each one of them. And if they would be Rishoyim, and if they would be evil, and they'd be more than 100 years old, then they'd have to be destroyed. And if they would have to be destroyed, as the rest of the generations, then it would cause tremendous pain to Noach. Therefore, he had them fathered at a time that they were all less than 100. So even if they were tzaddikim, they're under the guise of their father, or even if they were shoyim, they're not held culpable because they're the equivalent of minors. As a result of that, therefore, they will be included within the ark of their father. That's Rashi cites the Midrash. So we understand the Rishon, we understand why if they would be evil, they would die if they were more than 100 years old, and therefore Hashem wanted to prevent that from happening, and that would cause pain to their father. And Noach being the tzaddik, therefore Hashem didn't want that to happen. But if they be tzaddikim, each one of them would have to have his own ark. Why would each one have to have his own ark? For what reason? They have to understand. And also, that's the Midrash. But right, the way the Sforno explains, why does the Torah juxtapose Es Elokim Salach Noach to that Noach fathered 3 sons? Because in the merit of doing kiruv, outreach, that's why he married the 3 sons. How do we understand it? I mentioned very often we find whenever a monumental moment comes where we'll change the direction of history, especially when it's going in the positive direction, when we are able to achieve a new milestone in spirituality, there's always a tremendous amount of prosecution and kitrug. That's prosecution not to allow it to happen. The prime example is when HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted that Chizkiyahu Melech Yehuda should be Mashiach, and Sancheiriv should be the equivalent of Gog and Magog, Armageddon. The Midas Adin, the attribute of justice, came to Hashem and said, I don't think Chizkiyahu is worthy to be Mashiach. Why? Because after the miracle that Ashur, Sancheiriv, was destroyed, millions of troops were wiped out in one swoop, so Chizkiyahu should have said Shira. He should have sung the praises of God. Why didn't he? And if that's the case, he's not deserving to be Mashiach. That was the claim of Midas Adin against Chizkiyahu, and Hashem says, based on Midas Adin, he's not worthy to be Mashiach. And he was not Mashiach for that reason. So whenever there's a milestone where the world would have achieved its level of perfection and evil would have come to an end, it didn't happen. We're about to go into Eretz Yisrael. The generation passed away, perished over 40 years. It's a new generation. What happens at the last moment? We have a problem. 40th year, Baal Peor. That's what happens. Could you imagine? And God says, if not for the Zeltri of Pinchas, I would have consumed the Jewish people. There wouldn't be a remnant of them. Why did Hashem allow this? And then the Jews start complaining about the mun. They've been eating mun for 40 years, and all of a sudden now that a new thing enters their mind, lechem haklokel. We've had enough of this wafer bread. All of a sudden, this food, we haven't expelled it from our systems for 40 years. It's going to expand in our intestines, and we're going to die because our intestines are going to burst. What does Hashem do? He sends vipers, and they're bitten. Moshe makes a copper snake, puts it on an elevated location on a pole. Whoever looks at it and prays to God recovers. We're about to go into the Eretz Yisrael. This is the ultimate location where the Mishkan will become a Beis Hamikdash, where Amalek will be destroyed, where the king of Israel will be appointed, will be anointed. We're coming, this is the culmination, we're reaching the pinnacle of fully fleshing out our spirituality. At the last moment, there's always something that topples the apple cart. This is the kitruk. There's a kitruk. Noach is the only chance for the survival of humanity. Otherwise, humanity would have been destroyed, and God would have destroyed the world. And if he would choose to create a new world, he'd have to create a new world. Noach is the only saving factor, chance to continue. But you understand, if Noach has no children, there's no continuation. Because the generation is not worthy. And Noach doesn't have any special worthiness. No worthiness. Therefore, till the age of 500, he had no children. What does Noach start doing? He starts doing kiruv. He's taking up God's mantle. Esa Elokim Yisalech Noach. The moment he started to engage in kiruv, no kitrug, no prosecution could prevent him from having those children. Once he had children, now we talk about a future. There's a future to the world. And therefore, the Torah is juxtaposing, regardless of whatever reason, that the generation and evil was rearing its head at a level where God said, I will not tolerate it any longer. I will wipe mankind off the face of the earth because Noach engaged in kiruv. The schus of kiruv will allow him to have that children that the world should continue. And therefore, Noach fathers 3 children. They're less than the age of 100. So the kitruk shouldn't be able in any way to affect the children, because even if they're evil, being less than 100, they're equivalent of minors. And therefore, they go under the domain of their father, and therefore they will survive regardless of their personal behavior. But that's why he needed the schus of kiruv to have those children, because without that schus, the kitruk would have been too overwhelming and would have not allowed him to have children. This is like I always say, name it a shach. We find Yehuda was malchus, was kingship for the Jewish people. The children where kingship emanated from, how did they come about? He fathered twins from his daughter-in-law, Tamar. How did she present herself? As a prostitute. And she had twins. One of them was what? Was Peretz. Peretz is from Peretz came Malchus Beis David. Who's Malchus Beis David? Malchus Beis David ultimately will bring about the destruction of all evil. Do you think Satan's going to allow this to happen? He's not going to allow it. So the Shach explains, but what about if it's already soiled with this kind of scene? He engages with a prostitute, you know what I mean, to get Yehuda. Snare him with a prostitute. Once that impropriety is presented, Satan all of a sudden is blinded. This is the shochad. as we say, bribery blinds the eyes of the wise. Satan let it go, get under the wire. Because he says, I got the big fish. Yudah's failing. And as a result of that, we were able to slip it through that he's now, who's going to be conceived? Peretz, who is the founding father of the Davidic line, with Malchus comes from him. The story of Boaz and Rus, the story we read on Shavuos. Convert, she comes, and she's advised by a mother-in-law to go out to the threshing floor and put on your finest. And almost like present yourself where Boaz cannot control himself, sexually speaking. And the Gemara says in Sanhedrin that the level of willpower and control Boaz needed not to engage, to cohabit with her, was something overwhelming. And only then he says, you're special, and then immediately he attended to it, and he married her. But what was the precursor to that moment? She went out, and he nearly engaged with her out in the field. Why? Again, the Shach says, because this is the ultimate. This will bring about the birth of David HaMelech, and David is the founding king of the eternal king of Klal Yisrael. Therefore, it had to take on this guise of slight impropriety or lack of purity, because otherwise something wouldn't have allowed it. So therefore, Noach needed the schus of Kiruv. As Hashem look yourself, Noach, that if he's involved with Kiruv in that marriage, he's going to have children. Because Noach, being that special person, only he's qualified to have those kind of children. To be the one that humanity should continue. And in that schus, Satan, the Kichur, was not able to prevent it, and therefore the Torah is giving us the background why merited to have the children, and because they were less than 100, therefore they were not consumed, they didn't perish at the time of the great flood.